Welcome to Living Web Farms. My name is Pat Battle. I'm the director. I assume everybody that's here has been to our website. Is that true? Yes. Okay. Well, just to know that the purpose of Living Web Farms is to give people the tools they should need should our current supply chains be interrupted. My hope is that by people learning how to do things, maybe we'll figure out how to keep things working right. There was a quote in the promo from Alan Chadwick, and it was about gardening. And he said, basically, the cooking begins in the garden. You just finish it when you get into the kitchen. Does anybody or everybody know who Alan Chadwick is by any chance? Alan Chadwick basically taught America the whole raised bed intensive gardening system. He didn't invent it, it's been around for a long time, but he brought it to America, and he was an incredibly passionate gardener. There's a website, if you punch in Alan Chadwick Archives, and if you don't get it then, try adding Craig Siska. He's the man who put it all together. He has huge amounts of stuff to teach. He's an incredibly insightful gardener and teacher. That particular quote, I think, applies particularly to herbs. If you can grow herbs well, which, by the way, is easier said than done when it rains all the time and there's no sun, and what we want to grow is mostly Mediterranean herbs that grow where there isn't any rain and the soils drain well. But if you can grow herbs well, then your cooking in the kitchen becomes a lot easier. And we're going to look at how to grow them well. We're going to look, real importantly, I think, for this area, at how to propagate them, because I'm going to give you a heads up. My number one strategy for successful herb growing is to have backup plants in the greenhouse. Just because, May and the last half of July this year, how many days did it not rain? And how much sun did we get? And that's just the Mediterranean herbs. They just start to melt, I was looking up diseases. And I was going to list the diseases, but I figured, why does it matter? What's interesting to know about herbs is that you can't legally use fungicides on any herbs. They are not registered to have fungicides used on them. Nobody has an option. And a good reason for that is that most of the diseases that attack herbs, there's not much that works on those kind of diseases anyway. They're really terrible thugs, things like Phytophthora, which is a soil-borne, well, it's not just soil-borne. Phytophthora also includes things like lake blight. We all know how easy that is to deal with. They do not get cured. They're very, very tough diseases. I did a survey last night just thinking, somebody knows something I don't know? And the advice where you get those diseases invariably on every site that I came across was pull the plants out, destroy them, and start over again. Someplace else, because they are in the soil, And so we're going to look at a strategy that I hope will be more successful. It's worked for me before, but I haven't done it in years. And finally this year, I could tell you actually that I had planted a whole bunch of herbs that should be nice and big now for you to look at, and in another year it would have been, all along where we have a border on, as you go into the garden, it had become overgrown with weeds, and I came in and lasagna bedded it early on and put mulch down, rock dust, everything that should have made the herbs do great, raised it up so they get some drainage, and most of the herbs have melted away. And the few that are there actually just didn't even grow very much, just too wet. I found a place along the creek that was building up a lot of gravel and sand, and I have about, you'll see, it's not a very big bed, it's maybe 15, 20 feet long, and there's 2 wheelbarrows full of gravel and sand worked into the topsoil. And then we have this fancy rock dust we buy, which is paramagnetic, which helps plants to grow, helps the energy in the soil to get the nutrients to them, to say it very simply, not scientifically correctly actually. But I then added a bunch of that in too. So there's not a lot of soil at the crown of these plants, which is what they actually want, the Mediterranean plants. They don't do well with the soil because our soils tend to be heavy and hold water. And they grew in places where the soils were light and there wasn't a lot of water, particularly in the summer, there wasn't water and humidity, and that's what brings the diseases in. I would say, I'm sure this is going to work, but I've had it happen that I had herbs, gorgeous big herbs in pots on a deck. And how much more drainage can you get than that, right? And still, you get a month of our humidity and our rain, and they just go south. That's why I think the main strategy is to figure out a little propagation area and have new ones coming on, because that's a secret. Little herbs, way less prone to those diseases. It's when they're getting bigger and moving their energy towards reproduction that they're less able to take care of themselves. More prone to get hit by the rots and stuff. So having the backup ones, and if you have the right weather, sun, you actually get a lot of herb production pretty fast. So you can recover really quickly if you've got those backup plants. But a couple of sites said what I've said for years, you have to count on replacing sage in this climate. You can get lucky. I've had them get gorgeous and be big and wonderful for like 3 years. But at a certain point, it doesn't even have to be terrible weather. They just, totally melt away. So I say that it's easy to have them in the back, but as I was pulling out plants for us to put in and look at right now, I didn't like the looks of any of the sages in the greenhouse. It's just been too gray and too humid. But the good news is that we can take cuttings from them and start other ones. And then when the conditions are right, they'll do great. That's my strategy for getting around the kind of weather issue. Another one that's like that is basil. Basil used to be, don't we all remember when you just couldn't stop basil from growing? I remember the first time I grew a significant amount, which was a dishpan full in New Orleans, right? I had a dishpan full with soil. And I had to cut it back like 6 or 7 times during the summer. I got enough basil from that little dishpan to make a fair amount of pesto. And now we have this disease, it's a Phytophthora, I'm pretty sure, downy mildew. And once they get big and it's hot and humid, we've been starting successions. I look at the successions and I can see the disease is already on them. I was at a nursery, I bought some that looked pretty good. And as I was looking at them right now for the class, I could see that the beginning yellowing, which is how it starts, it yellows first and then there's a little dark spot in the yellow, it's on them. It's in a bunch of weeds, and maybe that's why. We have one in the greenhouse that hasn't gone down, and it's been growing since the spring. And so I told everybody, leave that one alone, and we're saving seed. Because that's part, and it's really, there hasn't been, as far as I know, that much work on this. I think they developed one sage that supposedly did better, had a bigger, rounder leaf in our heat and humidity. Actually, it died in the first year I had it, so I haven't been that impressed. But maybe for other people that is working. And there are downy mildew resistant basils. And they last a little longer, but we have so much pressure when it's like this, when there's so much humidity and so much rain, that resistance does not mean invincibility. And if you have endless infectious spores coming at you, at some point, you're going down. Really, for some things, you just have to figure out strategies. For basil, my solution to getting pesto is to get it in the greenhouse early and harvest a whole lot of basil early. And then as soon as I see the first signs on it, come in and harvest all of it. Leaving the plant in the ground with just a couple of tiny little leaves at that last branch, if the conditions change, it'll completely regrow. And once again, it's small and young, so it can actually kind of dodge that infection for a while. And that worked for us for a couple more weeks. Then the end of July came and the beginning of August, and endless rain, 4 inches of rain in one afternoon, it just isn't going to happen. And so you just have to keep trying, and we do rotations, successions of things like basil. And then some things, even though they have no problem, you have to do successions because that's the way you're going to get to grow them, because what they want to do is go to seed really fast. Things like cilantro. I have people complain and say they can't grow cilantro, it always goes to seed. It's like, yep, it does. Keep doing successions. Let it go to seed, let the flowers be there, they're great for the beneficial insects, and you get fresh coriander. I don't know if you've ever used the green seeds on the cilantro, but I've had chefs go crazy for it. It's a very aromatic, not dried version of coriander. Sometimes you learn to work with the fault and turn it into an advantage. I haven't really figured out how to turn downy mildew on the basil into an advantage yet, except that there have been years, I guess there is an advantage, there have been years that I just never got to making the pesto. And now, because I know I don't have a chance, I can't put it off till later, I get on it. I got my pesto in the freezer already, And there are the years where like, oh, I forgot to make the pesto, But now I don't get that choice, so I guess that's an advantage. I'd rather not have that advantage. Okay, so we actually are going to go down and look at a bunch of herbs and talk about them, appraise what we like about them, what we don't like about them, and then decide what we want to plant in the little herb garden section I made. One of the things we're going to talk about is the fact that this space is not huge where we're putting these herbs in. I have way more herbs than I should put in that space. But I actually might put more in than ultimately will stay there. And that's because when they're small, we can use that space. I can grow them bigger. If they're doing well, I can move them. If they don't do well, then maybe the one next to them will. And I get to harvest from all that growth. I will have to move them if I want them to do well. One of the keys in our climate to keeping your herbs healthy is to give them plenty of room, plenty of air. But when they're small, you can do that easily and still have space. You just have to be ready to accept that when you do well, and that sage does get big and bushy, then the thymes that are over here and the oreganos that are there have to move. Or the sage has to move because it's going to cover, My strategy is, what we're going to be doing is planting an herb garden and an herb nursery. So some of those ones I'll actually move around, hoping to do what I did there to the whole farmscaping border that didn't work. I'm thinking to get more river rock, raise it up, and try that, because I want a border of herbs. One of the things I love about herbs is when they flower, they're one of the very best plants, groups of plants for bringing in beneficial insects. I don't know if you've ever paid attention, but things like marjoram and basil and chives, when they're in bloom, there's just little clouds of insects buzzing around them. And lots of those insects are wasps that lay their eggs in our cabbage caterpillars, flies that lay their eggs in potato beetle larvae. All of those guys, they actually themselves feed on nectar and pollen. They don't feed on the pests, they feed on nectar and pollen. So those herbs flowering are part of our strategy for controlling bugs. And that's what I love about farmscaping. Another whole talk is that you can farmscape and not waste a bit of space, because you actually want to grow all those things anyways. You want to grow flowers because they're gorgeous, and you want to grow herbs because they taste good, but also the fact that they're blooming. So we're going to make a little garden today. It'd be way too big a job to try and do the whole thing. But then over the next year, I hope to be slowly building up that border, which I got to give up on. And what I did is it's interesting. We can look and see what did well. What did well were plants that are more vigorous, and plants that are more acclimated, like the echinacea did well, the dahlias did well. Very few of the dianthus did anything. And some new ones I tried, one called Caucasian mountain spinach, which is a perennial green. Well, now that I think about it, it does say mountain. Mountain tends to have good drainage, but not all mountains, not us. It's gone. It just went away, it's not there. And a bunch of the herbs, the stevia did well. And that's in the mint family too, I'm pretty sure. And the mints themselves, they can take, we got mint growing in the creek. Mints can take some water. Even though, ironically, the Mediterranean herbs are also in the mint family. But they're ones that adapted to a region where we don't have all that heat and humidity. Okay, so we're going to head out, look at those, talk about which ones we want to put in, kind of design, think about the design factors. And I'll give you one other heads up in the shade and sitting down. There are two plants there that totally make this herb garden nonsensical to plant there. They weren't planted there with a lot of thought. They were kind of planted, one planted itself, and the other was planted because somebody was working around the plant and had a nice baby and wanted to give it a home. So he just kind of stuck it outside of the garden, on the edge of the garden. And when he put it there, I was happy he put it there. But I wasn't thinking about the fact that it's called a cup plant, and it gets about, 8-10 feet tall, and about 4 or 5 feet wide. And of course, what I just say, herbs all need to have all the sun they can get. So in a way, this is totally the wrong place. But when they're young, they tend not to be as bothered by all those problems. And they're going to stay pretty young this year, And this fall, once these guys have died back, I'm going to dig both of those and put them at the bottom of the garden. Because cup plant's a wonderful plant for many reasons. One of the major reasons for a home gardener, if you have the space for it, is it makes little cups that hold water. And that water doesn't last through the day, so mosquito larvae can't survive in it, but it lasts through much of the day. And lots of tiny little beneficial insects like Baconid wasps that are very weak flyers, they've got a water feature, so they do way better. And so it's good for that. And also it flowers for weeks and weeks and weeks all summer, and that's feeding the beneficials. And it's got lots of other great values. It's an herb, actually, a medicinal herb too. But the best thing about it is it likes the water. And so the bottom of our garden is very wet, and that's where it's going to go. And not be at the top where I want sun and whatnot. But when you look at it, if you're thinking about my saying everything needs sun and air circulation to go with this, why is it going here? It's going there because in the end, that's where we wanted it. We wanted it on this border at the beginning of the garden. And so I just have to move those great big plants. And I could do it right now, they'd survive fine, but I can't bring myself to do it to them. They're just too glorious, and the insects are all enjoying them too much. So if I see that these plants aren't doing well, though I think they will because they're going to be small, then I will come out and move the cup plant sooner rather than later. That should let it finish flowering And that's the main thing I want. I want the insects to all enjoy it. And then I could, if I cut it down and dug it, it would be a little insulted, but it's such a vigorous plant. It wouldn't be stopped, you know. So let's head out. If people are interested, we have a huge lemongrass we haven't gotten in the ground yet, which wouldn't mind the heat and humidity at all, by the way. And so I won't put it in this section here. I'll put it in another section. But if people want to see how you divide it, we can do that. You know, we're going to do all kinds of hands-on propagation and dividing. But let's just talk about these guys. This was started from maybe 3 tiny bunches of chives from a little bunch we had in the garden. And this is about 4 or 5 parsleys. And we'll probably do some harvesting off that today, and that'll probably help it when it goes in the ground. It'll enjoy, you know, getting some air and then getting the space to grow. And it'll give us a nice harvest. I planted out in the farmscaping area several of the Italian parsleys, and they all went away. I was pretty shocked to see that because they usually can take this weather. But right here, we've had some pretty extreme. Like I said, I got here one night and I didn't want to get soaked, so I ended up spending 3 hours working in the greenhouse from 6 to 9 because it rained 4 inches. And then finally, I was tired of it and I just got soaked because I had to, you know, park the car and get back and lock the gate. And it just never stopped raining. It was like 4 inches. Those both can go not in as heavily rocked area drainage, but we'll probably put the parsley kind of halfway in that and half out of it. Hope that makes it do a little better. The chives, they can handle moisture and humidity. I do have one lavender that's living out there, and to me it's kind of special because I decided that for this class I would start lavender, rosemary, and stevia from seed again. I gave up on that years ago because anybody ever try to do that? How many do you get to come up? Right? Okay. Well, I used a germination chamber, and I used, you know, this fancy char grow inoculant we have that, you know, has a lot of good things in it for encouraging germination. And I managed to get about, out of a half flat, which would be 128 starts, I managed to get about 13 rosemaries and about 15 or 20 lavenders. The lavender was pretty funny because I'd totally given up on it. But there was something else in that flat that I was waiting to come along, and it was just sitting on a table, and I looked one day and it's like, wait a minute, those are tiniest little things. But they did germinate. They took about 6 or 8 weeks, but they did germinate. I just kept watering them. And then the stevia, I got probably 75% germination. There's a component in char, which I forget. People know about the use of biochar? Okay. Anybody not? Anybody kind of? Okay, so it turns out that the Amerindians Indians figured out like a long, long time ago that charcoal is actually a wonderful habitat for soil life and can improve fertility. At first, it kind of sucks up all the nutrients, so you have to charge it or wait for things to come back in balance. And also, it turns out that because the plants have to come back after forest fires, they've learned to use some of the byproducts of those fires. And there's actually a compound in there that helps germination. So I suspect that that's what helped me to get better germination. You know, and we buy this fancy, you know, inoculant, which I'd be happy to talk to you about if you want to know afterwards, that's made by someone we've worked with before, John Nilsson. But I think that any char would probably help with germination. So I just did it because I thought we should, and I'm pretty pleased with the germination. Meanwhile, our interns from 2 years ago started a flat of lavender, and every one of them came up. It's like, they're doing something right. Was it a different variety? Who knows, you know? Anyway, this is what happens when you have this kind of weather. This plant is living, but it's not happy. And one of the ones I started is out there, and it's living too, but it's not growing. You know, and it's been in now for 6 weeks, just sitting there. Likewise, sometimes went in the middle of June, and they're just sitting there looking at me like, well, when I get enough sun, I'll start to grow. This one here, this is what the one in the garden's grown a little, by the way. I'm exaggerating, right? It's about 3 times the size of that. But in a good year, it should be like, you know, significantly many branches and more like that, you know, with that much time. The rosemaries look like this, you know, and they're okay. They'll get the right weather, they'll do great. Meanwhile, I don't really care because I know I can easily start those guys from cuttings, and I'll show you how to do that. This rosemary is from last year. It's going to go in, and it'll be real happy to go in. We have a spider mite infestation in the greenhouse. So if you look close at this, I can pass it around. You can see the spider mite damage. See those leaves that have, like right there? Spider mites are gonna hate the weather. That's an advantage. We want the herbs to be hot and dry. The spider mites want it to be hot and dry too. So they're out there, they're gonna go right away. They're not gonna be a problem at all. See that? That's how you can tell there's spider mite damage. It's not significant enough that we've continued to try and release the beneficial insects to solve it, though I mean to. My entomologist friend was telling me I should get on it and order them, and then I got busy and I didn't. But hopefully this next year I'm gonna order a combination of 3 different predatory mites that'll feed on the spider mites. And why you get 3 is because you don't know what your conditions are gonna be in an unclimate controlled greenhouse. So one of them might work, you know. An interesting one here that people don't usually think of planting in the garden, but I actually grew it at Mountaineers Community Organic Garden years ago. And it lived for about 3 years outdoors with some row cover around it. You know, I put a piece of concrete reinforcing wire around it and then row cover over that, and it lived. But then 2009, got really, really cold for a long time and it died. The fun thing is, this is bay. And if you all look over here, you can see how well they can do. There's 2 of them here. You can just come look at them later too if you don't want to walk now, but there's 2 of them here and they're both huge. You know, I grow those and keep them in my garage, put them out on the nice days in the winter. I'm gonna plant one of these in a greenhouse here, you know. So they can do very well. Really, that's too much work. I don't recommend it. I recommend you take cuttings. The cuttings are pretty easy to root, but they sometimes take a long time. And the research I was doing on the internet was saying that the best time to do cuttings is in the fall, but it could take 6 to 8 months. Well, I did them in late May, and this one's from late May. So I think maybe late May is a better time than the fall, even though the way I first did it was in the fall because I read that, you know. But I'm here saying that, gee, I think maybe late May works better. Not all of them have started growing. They're all rooted. I can tell they will grow next year, but probably 2 or 3 of them out of about 8, I think, you know. You can go ahead and start 8. You get 2 or 3 going. You put 1 in your garden, 1 in a pot that you bring in case the weather's bad, and then you give the other one away. It's fun to have it. I love having, you know, those kind of herbs, having as many herbs as possible. And it doesn't seem to be hurt by the humidity and the rain. It seems to thrive despite that. This is another one that should not be bothered at all. This is French sorrel. Do people know sheep sorrel, the weed? I mean, there's an argument to be made that if you got sheep sorrel and you don't mind spending a little more time harvesting, why bother to grow this? The big reason to grow this is you can pick a lot more of it in a hurry, you know. The sheep sorrel is as tasty as my mind and as tender and quite closely related. But not everybody has it and some people don't want it because it can become kind of invasive. So we'll probably put a few of these out. Another unusual one, I don't know if people know this one, I can pass it around for you to taste. This is salad burnet. They say this likes to be in a moist, grassy area. It seems counterintuitive to me, but we might try this one. Put it like right up on the edge of a place that's grassy and see maybe if it thrives. Like I say, the internet's an interesting thing to look at, but I would highly recommend that anything you read on the internet, you say, okay, maybe that's true, let's see, you know. And I wouldn't bet a business on it, you know. So if you want to take a taste from that, it's got an interesting taste. I'll give you a hint up front because it's mild enough that you probably won't taste it, but it's supposed to taste of cucumber. And what I love about it is it's a totally different family, so you're eating something different. And it can get big enough that you could chop it up and toss it into a salad that didn't have cucumber, and you wouldn't really put your finger on it, but you would be having that cucumber experience somewhat too. So it's an interesting herb. Texture I don't think is very exciting though. You know. This is German wintertime. I find that to be the one that does best around here as far as winter hardiness. But we have a few other ones we'll put in, we'll play with and see how they do. The other rosemaries, I think they probably weren't shaded as much, but these were all started from seed. Lovage. I was flabbergasted, tell you the truth. I've always had lovage do wonderful and basically been pretty neglectful of it. It just melted. So we're gonna try again. We're gonna give it, you know, as I read, it wants better drainage. I've never had that problem, but just in honor of this class, I had it. You know, so we'll go ahead and put it in our little rocky, sandy bed and see if it does better. But we'll probably give that a little bit more fertility. Most of these herbs don't really want a lot of fertility, and they're not going to taste as good. And if they grow real fast, they're going to be even more susceptible to the disease. I actually don't know that I can prove this, but I expect actually that part of what we like the taste of the plant was developing to protect itself from things feeding on it. Maybe less so fungi, but maybe they would be better at that. So the bigger and lusher they are, usually the less well they do. This one here, we're not going to plant because I just stepped it up, but I wanted to talk about it because it's one that not a lot of Americans that aren't of Hispanic background, or Latin American background actually, know and care much about, but it's highly prized. I have a Mexican sister-in-law, and she's always asking me, Pat, where is the, in other words, just epazote, where is the epazote? And it's a weed, so I could always go find it, but some years when she's come, all I found was a pretty pathetic little one. And I see her just looking at me like, this is all you got? Because they just don't want to cook beans without epazote. And I've been at plenty of garden meetings where we pass it around to taste, and everybody goes, oh, I'd never go that, it tastes terrible. But they're tasting it raw. And it's not raw, it's cooked. And so it changes completely. Supposedly it helps with flatulence, makes the beans more digestible. Another name for it is worm seed, is worm seed, or maybe a product from it is worm seed oil. And that is because the plant also helps with parasites. And so they take the seed and distill an oil from it, and that helps with parasites. And what's fun about this particular one is that all the epazote I've grown before get about that big and go to seed. That's probably why I never had very nice ones, because they were always gone to seed by the time she showed up. But this one, I'm hoping, has maintained the properties of its parent. You know, I went looking for this just for this class because we saved seed and then didn't keep saving seed. And it was an epazote in our greenhouse that, rather than being, you know, a plant that gets this tall and then kind of scraggly, going to seed, making lots more, so you have them pretty soon, right? It got about 4 feet wide, 4 feet tall, didn't go to seed until late September. So if you want epazote, this one might be it. And so hopefully that'll happen. So I wanted to talk about it. I think it's fun to have in the garden. If you're doing authentic Mexican cooking, adding some epazote to your beans would probably give you a background taste. You wouldn't even notice it probably, even though it seems pretty strong. If I had more, I'd say taste it, but we could taste this one to death. And you won't like the taste anyways, you know? I mean, it's not good raw. The other interesting thing about this is it's actually in the lamb's quarter spinach family. So it's totally different compared to most of the herbs that we grow. There's not much in the world of herbs that is lamb's quarter spinach. And then stevia. How many people know stevia? Okay, stevia is a pretty amazing plant. And years ago, I was consulting with some people at Virginia Tech who were doing farmscaping, and it's always kind of hard to work with the university people because they want formulas. They want to do things in a real, like, everything like lined up and exact and all this stuff, and that's not what farmscaping is all about. And the guy that was doing it, Brinkley Benson, was doing a pretty good job, I thought. You know, he was growing a huge amount of stuff. That's where I learned about the cup plant. And then I looked and I said, isn't that stevia? And he said, yeah. And I said, why is that? And he said, oh, my son loves it. I was like, you're going to figure this out because you're ready to go outside the box. You're ready to do things for different reasons. And it turns out that stevia is one of the very last plants to flower in the garden. And that's critical if you're trying to support your beneficial insects, because it means they've got a good meal before they go crawl into cracks or, you know, burrow into the ground or lay their last eggs. The healthier they are at the end of their season, the better the chance that they're going to make it back the next year. Okay, so that will matter to you if you're a gardener and want to try and develop farmscaping. What it's good for as far as for culinary purposes is it is a source of sweetness that is actually pretty good for us. So I will confess that I just was reading something that was saying that the response to sweet, even if it doesn't have calories, still for people that have a problem with balance in their metabolism and stuff, still can cause their metabolism to store more fat than they want to. So maybe it's not as good as I thought it was. I thought it was just like, I can eat all the stevia I want. Frankly, I can't eat that much of it because it's got an aftertaste I don't like. But there is one prepared one I like, and I can use this the way I use it and love to use it, and will take a little bit to use. I make salad dressing. I'm pretty proud of my salad dressing. And my wife was buying Paul Newman's. I said, you're letting Paul Newman come between us? You know, it's like, she liked how he looked. I got that, you know. thought he was a good actor, but she said, yeah, I like it more. And I'm trying to figure out why. And then I looked, and like one of the early ingredients is sweetener. And it's like, oh, I'm not making my salad dressing sweet enough. And so, but I don't want to put sweetener in salad dressing. I just don't even like the idea of it. I can put a little bit of stevia in, and it just kind of takes the edge off the vinegar. And that's what she was liking more about, Paul Newman. So I do that all the time, and it's got an aftertaste that's in that kind of licorice area, but with all those other herbs, it comes across more like tarragon. And you still don't want to use a lot. In my mind, if you use a lot of stevia, you kind of like, you'll find a very small demographic that likes it because there's a strong aftertaste. It's not popular. If you haven't had a chance to taste it, feel free to take a little piece. You won't need very much at all, but a little bite will go a long way. By the way, I didn't talk much about the chives, but I assume most people know. How many people grow chives or have grown them? Okay, if you haven't, I highly recommend them. And I can probably find you a start out in the garden, or we can take a little piece off of these. Why I recommend them is they are there all the time. They are there almost all the time anyways. They pop up in February as soon as it starts to warm up. And they don't go down until sometime in November, or if it's a warmer year, sometime in December. So we've got them for, just about 10 months out of the year, or 9.5 months out of the year. And if you keep the flowers picked, they will, somebody took a little bit too much of that, I think. Yeah, you want to take a very small bite if you don't know that plant, If you keep the flowers off them, which by the way are edible and make very nice decorations in salads and also taste stronger than the chives, I'll warn you. Something to know about the flowers on herbs, yes, you can use, I can't think of a flower you can't use the herb from, but know that the flavor is going to be stronger in the flower. In fact, in your handout, which I was going to refer to my handout, but I left it up there. Actually, that's typical. In my handout, I talk about the fact that you want to harvest herbs before they go to flower because you'll get more of the essential oils and they have a stronger flavor. The good news is if you don't get to that, the herb, the foliage part won't be as strong, but if you have the flowers and you dry those, they're going to be strong as can be. So you're still going to get a lot of flavor, As far as keeping the plant in a vegetative phase, it's better not to let it go to flower. But as I say in the handout, since they're so good for beneficial insects, maybe you want to balance that a little bit, Let some of them go to flower to feed the beneficials and harvest some so they don't go to flower. Okay, so turmeric. Anybody grown that one? It's actually not that hard to grow. We also have ginger, but they're in bigger pots, so I wasn't thinking to plant any out. But we have a small turmeric, so we can put it out. We'll get a tiny little rhizome from this because they're going to make a rhizome no matter what before they're done. But the bigger the pot, the better. And we have a black turmeric. That one's pretty interesting, but I think it's actually more medicinal than edible, than culinary. But turmeric is a key piece to curries and also incredibly medicinal and pretty easy to grow. Its biggest factor around here is that it doesn't like too much heat. And so it actually, since I'm not going to take out the cup plant, we're going to plant this right by the cup plant. We're going to plant it a little behind the cup plant so it starts losing sun sometime around 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock or something and gets to cool off a little earlier. And it'll like that. It can take some shade. It's an understory plant. Likewise, ginger. And folks, I recommend playing with both ginger and turmeric. And if you go to the kind of store that sells them fresh, you can find ones that are starting to show buds and you can just root those and grow them. Or you can buy them and just put them in a place with a lot of warmth and like cover them so the humidity stays in too. And you can get them to pop. Now, you don't want to do that if you're thinking about commercially growing ginger and turmeric because you could buy diseases. You want to get seed stock that's been certified disease-free. But what I can tell you, and it's kind of ironic, we one time got seed stock given to us. We mostly, because we just grow in pots, so we're not worried about spraying disease. If disease shows up, we just won't use that soil for those crops again, right? The only time we ever had disease, it was from the seed stock we got. So... and I don't need to talk about where we got it from or anything like that, but we haven't had any disease so far. But I would be aware of that. If you think you might suddenly want to go in the business, you wouldn't want to buy it from a store. You'd want to make sure, that you've got stuff and even try it the first year and make sure you like your source, because the diseases can be pretty tough. But they're fine to grow in pots, and we get a fair amount of yield just doing it that way. So this is the best basil we got. And it looks great, doesn't it? But for somebody who's been pummeled by downy mildew enough, right there, see that? That's the disease. And so now that I have you here, I'm just going to pass the leaf around and you can look at it. It's pretty subtle. And so I can't do much about that. With this small plant, I just got to put it in the ground and hope, and there's not much else. This is good genetics. This is supposedly disease resistant. This is downy mildew resistant basil. That's all we even try and grow this time of year. And if the weather changes, we'll be great. And if we keep doing that, we'll eventually hit the window where we can get another crop of basil, probably. Because eventually it dries out towards the end of the year and it's still warm enough that the basil will grow. So that's my strategy, is just keep sowing, take your licks and don't give up if you like basil, But you can look at this, and we'll see, we'll get to look at much worse ones, but you can see how that's just starting to yellow a little. There's that little brown, and boy, when the weather is rough and the plant's already starting to go to seed, that'll spread like crazy, It'll just like be all over the place. And so you can't do much about seeing that, but what you can gain from that is it's time to harvest, And the more you harvest, the smaller you make it, the better chance that it'll survive. If the weather is going to stay the same, hot and humid and rainy, then it's not will that disease manifest more, it's like when it manifests more. So the sooner you get on it and harvest that and knock it back, then you have a better chance of delaying it.
So if there is disease in that plant and you say it's in the soil, what do you do with that soil?
Well, this actually isn't. This is an airborne one.
That's airborne.
Yeah, but you rotate to a different crop for a long time.
You rotate to different, you don't just take all the soil out or anything like that.
That's not practical. It'd be great if we could do it, we could just, let's swap the soil out. Like those diseases, I'll get some fresh soil, but the world doesn't work that way. So we have to just keep, figuring out how to deal with it. We try to get resistance. But meanwhile, what you do is you come in and grow a cover crop and do all the best practices you can, and then grow totally different plants that aren't at all related to that. You might even want to go online and look up and make sure that they're not alternate hosts. And that's an example not with herbs, but a Phytophthora, a different Phytophthora that attacks peppers and squash, Phytophthora capsicii. I first learned about it at Highland Lake years ago, and I just knew that if I had it, I didn't want to grow any of those things near it. At that time, they weren't talking about the fact that it also attacked beans. So we got it here, and it wasn't very bad. Our extension agent was like, you have incredible soil that, that these plants lived as long as they did. Usually it kills everything in a couple days, and we got the peppers to last for most of the year. And some never died at the top of the garden. It starts in wet places and moves up. But we said, quarantine, nothing grown here, cover crop, just toss the seed on, stay away from it. Don't even walk in the paths, we don't want to spread it. And then we gave it a year of cover cropping, and then we had lucked into a whole bunch of pond muck. So we layered pond muck on top of it, and then did a lasagna bed on top of that, and then capped it with pond muck. So we got way above where the disease was, and then we thought we'll grow nothing that feeds the disease, and if we only grow things that we throw the seeds on and don't work the soil, they won't get the disease and they'll be fine. Lo and behold, what we grew was beans. And then I get a test result back from a disease in the greenhouse, and it's the same Phytophthora, and they say that one of the hosts is beans. I'm like, blew that. But lo and behold, because we'd done all that stuff to make the soil really healthy, and it was pretty darn healthy anyways, and it wasn't a wet year, our beans did fine. But we always planned on not pulling them up because that would bring the disease up. Just cutting them off and not disturbing the soil. And now we can use that bed in dry years. This garden has a wet weather spring on the right side if you're facing this way, facing west, and we can't grow anything this year. It's just like so wet, there's water bubbling out of the soil. But when it's dry, a dry year, that bed's pretty good. And that, by the way, is why we got that disease, because it likes the wet. So the reason I'm talking about even as vegetables is the same thing could happen with herbs. You could go, oh, I can't grow these herbs there, but I can grow this. Does everybody know you can go to your extension agent and say, what's hurting my plant, and they'll figure it out for you? Now, if they have to send it to Raleigh, they'll charge you a fee. And you might not want to spend that fee. I recommend it if you're really serious about growing something, because you have to know what you're facing, But I think it's like 25 bucks, but for the knowledge, for me, it's worth it. But once you have that, you can ask them, and they can probably tell you everything. But I do a double check, because some of these diseases, they're finding new hosts, they're spreading. The scary thing is, one of them said, you know, and then numerous weeds. It's like, well, great, you know. I got to keep all weeds out because which weeds are they, you know? Somewhere somebody knows it, you know. But yeah, this is airborne. This is host obligate. It's not gonna be present without the right conditions, you know. It's coming in, you know. I take that back. It may have a host that overwinters on. You know, I'm thinking of other photoptas like tomatoes. They don't have unless you let potatoes volunteer and come back that had late blight, it's not here at the beginning of the year. It has to come from the tropics, which as it gets warmer and warmer, it gets here quicker and quicker. Okay, so we're gonna plant the basil and see how it does. Oh, and something I didn't mention that we could do, and that might be worth trying actually. That's actually a good idea. We'll see if we have time. That one basil that's doing so well, we could take cuttings from that. It's very easy to root basil. It's a mint. So you can take, you know, small cuttings, take most of the leaves off, and see, is it conditions or is it genetics? Who knows? But if we take cuttings and get them growing and they don't get the disease too, you know. And I shouldn't say don't get it. It has a disease. It's just vigorously growing beyond it, which is pretty interesting, you know.
And what do you do with the leaves?
I would put this in the garbage, you know.
In the garbage.
Yeah, I put it in something that's going to be sealed and going to a landfill, not going, you know, even though I think it's probably host obligate, you know, I would not want it to spread. But the truth is, I say that, but we have basil plants covered with it. So it's really kind of, you know, I mean, really what's most important is I wouldn't go someplace with it that doesn't have the disease, you know. I'm pretty certain that this disease, as soon as this leaf dies all the way, is also going to be dead. But I'm not 100% certain of that, you know. So I would just be careful with it. Not so much here. We have the disease. You know, we can't really give ourselves the disease. We have the disease, you know. But you wouldn't want to move it around. You know, that's the key thing. And indeed, before you go back to your gardens, I'd wash your hands, you know. I mean, I don't know that it could travel on your hands, or that this may not even be in the sporulating stage. It doesn't look to me like it would be. So it probably isn't infectious yet, but it's a bad enough disease. How many people can't grow basil without it getting sick anymore? Yeah, I mean, it's here for a lot of people. If you don't have it, be very grateful and enjoy it, you know. And I hope that you continue not to have it, you know. I am not jealous. I'm happy for you. It didn't hit us for a long time. I was hearing about it for several years before it hit us. And I was going, what are they talking about, you know? And then all of a sudden it hit, and it's like, oh, that's what they're talking about, you know. So these are herbs I bought for this class. To me, the prize is tarragon, because we lost our tarragon and I love it. And I bought 3 because I wanted to take one and divide it and show you how to divide it. Okay, and then we'll put 2 of them in. The ones we divide, we'll pot up and let them get bigger for later. And the thing to know about tarragon is there's a bunch of things that are called tarragon. There's only one that is really great culinary-wise, and that's French tarragon. And if somebody offers you seed for tarragon, grow it if you like flowers. You know, grow it if you like something that's got a strong licorice taste. But if you want a subtle licorice taste, which is what tarragon is, and some other background flavors, you want the French tarragon, which rarely, if ever, goes to seed and is propagated by root divisions. Okay, so that's the one that we're going to be doing today. These guys I just bought because, and this one here, so it is conditions. This was growing at something time in the garden or something. It's a sweet little nursery on North Merriman. That also, by the way, the owner runs a community garden and grows food for the hungry. So I'm forgetting her name right now, but kudos to her. It was a pleasure to give her business, and her name might come to me yet. When I bought this, I saw no manifestation of downy mildew. That could be because where it was growing was on pavement in a pot, you know, and it was kind of southwest facing, so it was getting lots of sun and dryness. And so there might not have been much disease there, and it might have been the right air circulation. Here, I bought it on Tuesday. Now it's got, you know, you'll see it when we go to plant it, but there's a leaf there that's looking worse, you know. And actually, I might as well pass it around because it'll show you the progression. You saw the beginning of it. Now you'll recognize right away the progression of that disease. The lemon, still looking good. Now I think these lowered yellow leaves, I don't think that's it. I think that's just leaves on the lower part of the plant dying. And that's not uncommon. We do way better with holy basil. It doesn't get the downy mildew nearly as much. Unfortunately, it's not particularly culinary, it's more medicinal. You can kind of do some curry stuff with it and all, but you wouldn't want to eat a pesto of holy basil.
What's holy basil?
Holy basil or sacred basil is it's a wonderful herb. It's largely used as an adaptogen in Ayurvedic medicine. There's a bunch of different kinds, and we grow a lot of them every year. You make tinctures from them and stuff. They're really good for, various ones have different properties, but they're really good for your immune system. I think this actually hasn't got it yet. It will get it. It's not like it's impervious, but it's way more resistant. And likewise, the holy basil. Unfortunately, the one that we like the most, the sweet basil, or the Genovese basil, which is a variation on sweet basil, they're just way more susceptible.
And have you ever tried to grow a whole bunch of different basils together and have better result? Because I've grew about 7 kinds together and I haven't had the down on the sweet.
Right. Well, and then maybe it's your location too. Didn't you say you were on kind of a ridge or something?
Well, I got it in the air shed spot because I knew it needed it.
Yeah, right. So that's probably got a lot to do with it too,
But it's kind of squished
Yeah.
in now.
We had mixed up holy basil and basil, and it didn't seem to help. The basil just went down on the holy basil stick, But we're in a bowl, You've got air drainage. We don't have air drainage, at this garden. And that's just a reality of where we are. And it's kind of good you're coming to this class because a lot of you will be in a better situation, So if you try the tricks that we're trying today, your odds are way better. This is kind of like, well, we're just going to keep trying. I keep a lot of herbs on my deck because I can then propagate from those. But even my sage on my deck is looking bad this year. It's just not a good sage year. Okay, so we also have several kinds of thyme. You're all welcome to take a little taste off them, see which ones you like. English thyme, lemon thyme, might have silver thyme here. I'm pretty sure that's what that one is. But just bought a few varieties of thyme just so people can look at the different ones. We'll put them in. And this one here, actually, this is a great one to talk about harvesting. In the handout I gave you, I talk about the fact that you really do want to harvest, even if you're not using, you want to harvest, maybe dry and save or give to friends or whatever. But if you don't harvest a thyme like this, what's going to happen is it's going to start to drop leaves from the bottom and make these woody stalks. And eventually it becomes not nearly as productive. And it's just like, it's got these stalks that are all at the end and there's about this much thyme on them. And indeed, I can show you because I harvested from one I have like that, and I got, each branch is that long and there's this much thyme at the end of it. So by cutting back, and you want to cut back, right now we're a little late for doing it, but because this is going in the ground, I think it'll be fine. And we put his energy into rooting. If you cut it back this time of year, cutting back on plants you probably have experienced stimulates them to grow, right? That's how you get growth from various things. That's why the latest advice for pruning is not to prune in the winter, but to prune in June when the plant is so busy trying to grow that it doesn't put more energy into putting all those suckers out. And so the idea is to cut back, harvesting up to 1/3. And you can do this earlier, like sometime in May, you got lots of it and you want to get a lot from it, take 1/3 from it. And then it'll just grow like crazy and you'll be able to get another 1/3, maybe even 3 times. But then sometime towards the end of July or in the early part of August, back off. Because you don't want that lush growth and you do want a lot of reserves for it to make it through the winter. A lot of that lush growth could winter kill if it does, if we have an early cold. Like 1 out of every 10, 15 years, it'll be bitter cold in early November. They might not be hardened off enough by then and they might die because of that. More likely they'll die from heat and humidity, but cold gets them once in a while. Okay, and then the last one I think we'll talk about, oregano. There's a couple things to know about oregano. The most important one, as far as I'm concerned, is if somebody offers you oregano and you want it for culinary purposes, ask them what color the flowers are. If they say pink, tell them thanks, but you're going to look for the Greek oregano or Greek type, the white flowered one, way stronger. And I mean, if you're using it in salads and stuff, then the pink flowering one is fine. It's it's not going to overwhelm you as much, and you just use less of this, but you can use more of that. But if you're cooking with it, it kind of disappears pretty quick. So you want to go for the white flowered one. Now, that said, the pink flowered one dries really nicely, those flower heads on it too, and is wonderful for Christmas wreaths. So it's got its use, but I'm not that excited about it as far as culinary goes. And so another thing about this might be a great one. Maybe I'll grab a staple. and we can demonstrate layering. Do people know what layering is? So basically we'll get a staple and we'll take this branch, right, which is a nice long one, and we'll take some leaves off right there about in the middle of it, right where I know I can get a staple to hold those leaves where the leaves were in that part of the stem under the soil. And stapled in then, the plant will keep feeding that branch, right? But the fact that those leaves have been removed, those are sites where leaves are, right? Those sites where leaves were, plants have the ability to do various things. They can make roots there if they need to. So by taking those leaves off and putting it in the soil, it'll root there and we'll have a baby plant. And next spring you come back and you'll see that that one branch is much more vigorous and it's growing. And then you can cut it from the mother, let it get used to that, let it learn to be on its own, and a little later you can come dig that and move it and have another plant.
You scrape the stem or not?
Well, I don't think you need to with this. I mean, this is mint family. These are really easy to root, you know. Something else you might want to scrape it, you know. But this one I don't think you need to. I'm going to go grab a little bit more rock dust and some more of the fancy char stuff that we'll put in with the plants. We'll make like a planting mix, but it's not going to have a lot of nutrients in it. The plants, if they need nutrients, they're going to get their roots down. There's plenty of soil below that's quite nice. I don't want them to grow too fast. I want them to grow tough, and I want them to grow dry. And so we'll see how that works. And boy, would this class have been different if I taught it in 2016. I mean, if I could have taught it through the smoke. But you know, we had a wicked hot drought that year, and all these plants did spectacularly. You know, no problem at all. 2013, I'd have a hard time finding plants to show you what to do with. That year we drowned. You know, that's the mountains, keeping them young and keeping small ones. So if everybody will just grab a plant, we'll go out there and we'll design this. And basically, we're going to figure out which ones we want to see in there. We can't put them all in, but we'll put some of them in, and we'll figure out which ones, and we'll just demonstrate planting them. And then we'll go back in the greenhouse and look at propagating.